Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 624 for February 16th, 2025, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brennan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. Boy,
All
this
right.
is going to be a really, really fun show. We have some Harrison Ford to talk about. We have some BAFTAs to talk about. However, before we get to any of that, I got to start this week's show, and I apologize up front. I'll do my best to get through this as quickly as possible because we are a film podcast.
InSession Sports is
talk
back.
about film. Yes, we have lots of film to talk about, but I gotta start by talking about how over the weekend we had probably the biggest hockey game of my lifetime, at least of the last 10 to 15 years, and I am certainly not exaggerating.
Yeah,
If
that's true.
you follow the sports world at all, you already know what I'm talking about. The NHL, in lieu of an all-star weekend, as they typically do, they have decided to put on what they're calling is this Four Nations face-off. It is an appetizer to something that they are eventually going to get to called the Hockey World Cup. They've been wanting to do this for years and years and years, but through business things falling apart, then COVID happened, it just it's prolonged itself.
Yeah.
So until they can get to that point, and they're going back to the Olympics as well starting next year, they gave us an appetizer. They said, hey, look, we'll put 4 teams together. It's the United States, it's Canada, it's Finland, it's Sweden. Those 4 can get together. We'll have a little mini tournament.
Yeah, a testing of the waters, or a testing of the ice.
Of the waters.
I guess is the better way to put it.
We're testing the ice waters. And so we're going to put this little tournament together. And we were all pretty excited. It's the first time we've had NHL best on best hockey in a decade, and literally over a decade at this point. And the players have wanted this as well. It's not just the fans. The players wanted this as well. So they get this together. And it just so happens that this coincides with the United States electing a certain new president that took over the White House in the year of our Lord 2025. And one of the things that he did, without getting into politics here, I'm just stating that he ruffled the fans of Canada, or ruffled the feathers, excuse me, the Canadian geese feathers, if you will, of Canada. And Canadians did not take to that very well. So even before all of this started, when American NHL teams were going up to Toronto and Montreal and Ottawa and visiting the Canada teams, the Canadians at those teams, or for rooting for those teams, would boo the U.S. national anthem, and that sparked a little bit of outcry and discourse, of course, and that kind of built up this this Four Nations face-off, because we knew that United States and Canada, who are already bitter hockey rivalry.
I was going to say, the rivalry is already there.
Rivalry. Yeah. The rivalry was already there. Now you have this political, energized discourse kind of amping up all of this as well.
Yeah, especially considering the day we're recording this, tomorrow is President's Day. So there might even be more of a fueling of that happening.
Yeah, perhaps. Certainly that could be part of it. And there was friction. There was contention. There was a lot of anticipation for this Canada-U.S. matchup.
The blades are out.
Exactly. The blades were out. And I was excited for the hockey of it all. What I did not anticipate, and there are a lot of others that are in this camp as well, did not anticipate that the film, I'm already thinking about film, that
there's going to be a movie about this eventually. You know that.
there might be that the game would start off with 3 fights in 9 seconds. Off the puck drop, we had a fight immediately. Immediately. So, yeah, I mean, to say that these teams were engaged, that this rivalry was amped to another degree that we've never seen before, I think is putting it lightly.
Sure.
It was a massive success. The U.S. goes on to win 3-1. Game winner by my boy Dylan Larkin, captain of my Detroit Red Wings, getting the game winner for the U.S. Oh, man, it was a glorious hockey game.
Knowing this weekend being what it was and how much of a hockey fan you were, and the fact that later on this year we will be gearing up for our 1999 movie retrospective, the fact that you text me about Mystery Alaska, I'm thinking, oh, well, that tracks. That absolutely tracks now.
Yeah, I told Brendan that I realized that Mystery Alaska came out in 1999, so my number one is already set in stone. I just got to figure out the rest of my list.
It doesn't matter. The rest of the list is meaningless. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, that game was electric. It was one of the best hockey games I've ever seen. And to start it off that way, and there's something about the sports world and where we are now. For the NHL, this was such a massive success. You had major people in other sports, tweets going super viral from people that are not regular NHL hockey people, talking about how magnificent that game was. It was such a huge spotlight for the sport, and they absolutely crushed it. It's probably not an exaggeration to say that the NHL garnered millions of fans that night. In terms of TV ratings, it was one of the most non-Stanley Cup final playoff games ever watched on ESPN, certainly of the last 20, 30 years.
Well, where's Gavin O'Connor? He's really good at sports dramas. He's done a hockey movie before. Miracle's a really good movie, so maybe he's the one that's tapped to make this movie at some point. It
certainly feels cinematic. It really, really does, especially if Canada and U.S. play in the gold medal game, which is happening this Thursday. As this episode is released, there are 2 more games happening tonight. The round robin finishes, and depending on how that goes, we'll see who faces off against the United States in the gold medal. And it might be Canada. I think it's very likely. Very well might be Canada. Yeah, it's very likely we'll get that matchup. And now that the first couple of rounds were in Montreal, so that U.S.-Canada game was in Montreal. The United States won on the road in Canada, but now everything shifts to Boston. So we are moving to the United States now. So if we do get that rematch, it's going to take place at TD Garden in Boston.
Those airings, man. I mean, if we thought the airings and the viewership of that first game was something, I think it's going to be upped quite a bit when it comes to that second game.
I think so. I think
this is what the NHL is pulling for. They've been pulling for this for quite some time, but they've been pretty successful at boosting that viewership.
This is why the fans and the players wanted this. It is a huge marketing tool for the NHL, and it's been nothing short of a success. And that U.S.-Canada game was off the charts phenomenal in terms of the hockey, in terms of the electricity of it all. I'm telling you, if you've never watched or paid attention much to hockey, give the games this week a go. It's a sport that you'll fall in love with. It's everything you love about American sports combined into one sport, and it is phenomenal. It's so good, and I'm deeply excited for Thursday. Anyway, that is my hockey rant. Not even rant, but my hockey electricity just kind of bouncing.
Your hockey dance right
off the
now.
Walls.
I mean, it's a great segue in many ways, because one of our first topics is once again about turning art into sports in its own way, because the award circuit is very much about that thing. But I love seeing you jazzed for hockey. You become a very animated man, and it's really fun.
Dude, I am so excited for this tournament, and I just for the game itself, I was amped up. And as the game was going on, because obviously I'm a Red Wings fan, and when Dylan Larkin scored to give the United States the lead, I literally ran through my house. I turned into a child.
I bet your family would have really loved that. Guessing Sam and Andrew are playing along with you, probably.
One of my favorite memories when I was a kid was the 2002 Olympics. Now, I was a little bit older at that time. I was in high school, but I was at an age where, and hockey was a lot of my life at that time, but I had never really been invested in the Olympics more than I was at that age.
Sure.
And that was maybe arguably the best American assembled team to that point. And they had a real shot to beat Canada in the gold. And they brought Herb Brooks back to coach that team. And if you're not familiar with Herb Brooks, he was the head coach of the Miracle team in 1980.
Miracle. Yeah.
So they brought him back for 2002, and they face off against Canada in the gold medal of that year as well. And that was a really fun Olympics. And I had the jersey and everything. It was one of my favorite jerseys growing up. So
clearly a formative moment for you in many ways.
Very much. Yeah. Very formative.
Yeah.
So watching this Canada US game certainly was reminiscent, although it was a different outcome this time with the Americans winning 3-1. And when Dylan, my boy Dylan, who I think is so underrated, so deeply underrated in the hockey scene.
He's great. Yeah.
For him to score that goal, oh my God. I turned into 12 years old again, for sure.
Hey, your kids were probably like, well, I guess my dad is now a childhood friend of mine.
Yeah.
It's like he's just completely de-aged. He's like Benjamin Button running over here.
Before we get to the BAFTAs, I want to tell this story as well. I mentioned this on the VIP episode this week, but in case you're not an InSession Film VIP, and if you're not, become one. We have bonus content all the time. You can sign up on Patreon, patreon.com/InSessionFilm, or you can become a member on our YouTube channel or Apple Podcast subscriptions. We have 3 different ways that you can become an InSession Film VIP supporter and listener. And we had VIP bonus content this last week where we were talking about all of the Super Bowl trailers. But amongst all of that fun conversation, I told a story about a possible ghost that lives in my little home here. And
apparently haunts this particular room that you podcast in.
Well, yeah, and I was going to build to that because for those that might have listened to our Presence conversation, I somewhat told this story there, but there was an update to it. So to reiterate, in case you didn't listen to our Presence review, when I was telling a story on that episode, because I've always thought that maybe there was a ghost or something in the house, because weird things happen here all the time. And I was preparing for that review. And for those on YouTube, you might see that I have these lights on behind me. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, when we do these shows, I have these green lights behind me that you can see on YouTube.
Yeah.
And sometimes, some of them run on batteries, so I have to change them out from time to time. And I was changing out some batteries in preparation for that conversation. And I took the old batteries out. I laid it out on the counter, went over here to the closet to get the new batteries. I come back, and the batteries that were on the counter, gone, completely gone. Now you might be sitting there saying to yourself, well, they probably just fell on the floor. Oh, I looked. Yeah. It was the first thing I did. I looked onto the floor. I looked underneath all of the counter or the desk here, the changing table for the baby, nowhere to be found. They were not on the floor. I looked everywhere in this room. It could have been my wife. She was putting our baby down to sleep. My son, who was in the other room over here, was also going to bed. So it was not him either.
Yeah, well, and that was my first guess when you brought this story up, was did one of your kids just happen to snag them? The other question I think I asked you, I don't remember if I asked you this, was did your dog happen to eat them or something like that? That
could be part of it. I would imagine he would have gotten sick, maybe died.
I was going to say that doesn't sound like a good recipe. So hopefully that's not what happened.
Yeah, that's the only thing I cannot confirm at this point. But the dog is okay. He didn't get sick. I would imagine he would have gotten sick if that was the case.
Yeah.
Those batteries just disappeared. And I thought that was extremely eerie because we were about to talk about Soderbergh's new film Presence. And again, if you've seen that film, there's a scene in that movie where that happens almost verbatim, except it's books, right? Where she puts books on the bed, goes to take a shower when she comes back to the room. And we see it in the film, the ghost literally picks up the books and moves them to a different place. So when she comes back, she's very alarmed.
Yeah.
So it was very, very similar to that. It was very eerie. And I still don't know what happened to those batteries. And so I thought that was a fun story to tell on that show. Now, fast forward a couple of weeks, and we have the Super Bowl a week ago. And I have some friends over, and it was a great time. We watched the game. It was glorious. The Eagles won, and they go home.
Yeah.
And on the way home, I get a text from them saying, "Hey, we think we saw a ghost in your house." To which I responded, "Yes, you did.
You definitely
Yes,
did. You are not full of it. You're not seeing things.
You are not seeing things. There are weird things happening in this house. And not just in this house, to Brennan's point a moment ago, in this room where we are podcasting now, this is where all the weird shit happens.
That's where the haunting happens.
In this room. It's in this office where things happen. Another thing that's very weird is, so like just on the other side of this wall, again, if you're listening to the show, behind me, there's a wall, and on the other side of that wall is this bathroom.
Yeah.
And oftentimes at night, I will go in there before bed, wash my hands and face, all that stuff, and go to bed. And when I'm washing my hands, sometimes, you know how like when people walk by you or run by you quickly and you can kind of see them in your periphery, but it happens so fast, it's kind of a blur.
Yeah, and you can kind of feel the brush of them kind of making their way by.
That happens to me semi-regularly, where I'm in there washing my hands, and I swear someone runs by me. And I look, and of course there's nothing there, but they're running into this room. They're running into the office is what it feels like. And it happens all the time.
It's so funny that whatever this haunting is at your house, it's really just relegated to like petty mischief. Like I think it's just the greatest thing.
Yeah, it's just petty mischief. It's Casper-like. There's nothing harmful about it to this point.
It's told you,
more
JD,
fun and goofy games.
I told you that ever since that we've been doing video here and you've been telling this story, I've been actively looking behind you to see if I can notice anything relatively similar to something you call spiritual or something, some presence or some entity. So I've got my ghost light here now. So I'm flaming it here now. So.
Exactly. Yeah. And as I said to our VIP listeners, if you're watching us on YouTube, generally, I'm not always looking at our screen here because I have my notes pulled up or IMDb or whatever the case may be. So I'm not always looking at my screen here and what's happening in the background. So if you see something, if you're watching this and you see something, please let us know, because I may not catch it.
Yeah, the light will go
something
off.
weird might happen. Who knows? It feels like weird things happen in here all the time. So I feel like I'm living with a ghost.
I mean,
I don't know if it's true or not, but it feels like it.
I mean, that much we can confirm. Weird things do happen in that room and on this podcast all the time. Maybe it's not always related to this ghostly buddy of yours that's with you. But weird things do happen all the time.
Yeah. So I thought that was a weird little update that I wanted to tell everybody.
So I guess more to come, right?
Yeah. Because when I told my friends that, they called me immediately. They didn't even text back. They called me because I was so adamant that no, what you think you saw, you probably saw. You probably did see a ghost, because I do think there is one here.
I still haven't seen anything behind you yet, and I'm really hoping I do someday, because I wanna partake in this story. I want to partake in this as not just an innocent observer.
Yeah, it's fun happenings all the time. At any rate, with hockey and ghost stories out of the way, let's talk about BAFTA, because
that happened. BAFTA happened.
The BAFTAs happened over the weekend. And Brendan, what do you think about this year's crop of winners for the BAFTAs?
I think there's one really interesting one we'll certainly talk about, but in a way, I'm not too surprised to see a movie like Conclave win Best Film over at the BAFTAs. It just feels very much like a BAFTAs related movie in many ways, right? I don't know, just like it just seems like the kind of movie that would do well there. But I think outside of that, and maybe what it might mean for the Oscars, I think we did see a lot of things happen that are potentially going to solidify what we might see at the Oscars. I think in many ways, Kieran Culkin's kind of a lock right now. Zoe Saldana is pretty much a lock right now. I think given Conclave's win as Best Film, I think that's pretty much a lock right now for Best Adapted Screenplay. And then you also have the likes of Brady Corbet for The Brutalist, although Sean Baker could sneak in there. And that's the other thing I was about to say. Mikey Madison winning for Anora. I feel like we certainly have a race right now for Best Actress, because I could see it going either way come Oscar night between her or Demi Moore. I'm not really sure which one it's going to go to yet. I will say it did set a lot of things, I don't want to say in stone, but it did start to confirm a lot of what we might be seeing. I think what we need to wait and see, though, is that we still have SAG, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to be a huge solidifier. But right now, given the way things are going, I don't know the exact statistic, but I think the last time a movie won as much as Anora has, but didn't go on to win Best Picture at the Oscars was Brokeback Mountain, which was quite some time ago. So, just given the historical context there, if you're a betting person, you might want to start looking at Anora most likely. But if there's any race where something could change historical course, it's this one, because I still think there are some things that are up in the air, although I do think BAFTAs are slowly confirming what we thought we were seeing, and now we're probably going to be seeing.
Yeah, that's real interesting, because, and I don't have all of these stats in front of me. However, looking at Best Film specifically for BAFTAs, and if it's some sort of precursor to the Oscar, the last few years, there has been a lot of crossover.
Sure.
With All Quiet on the Western Front being the outlier. But you had Nomadland, Power of the Dog, and Oppenheimer also win Best Film at the BAFTAs.
Right.
Now, in the 2010s, though, it did not hit all that often, right? You had 1917, Roma, Three Billboards, La La Land, The Revenant, Boyhood, 12 Years a Slave, Argo, and The Artist, and then The King's Speech. So only a few there. Only a few crossed over. So I'm curious what that means this year. You also have to consider that the Oscars, the Academy specifically, has changed a lot since 2016, right?
Yeah.
So some of these winners pre-2016, I don't know if it makes
a different
sense
demographic
in a modern context.
Yeah.
Yes, I do agree. Which is why I looked to, okay, since 2020, we'll say the last, 4 or 5 years, okay, there's been a little bit more crossover there.
Yeah.
How, the other caveat, though, is this year, 2025, has been an insane season with the winners all over the place. like it just feels like nothing has been consistent. So
that's why I said if there's any year where any trends get completely upended, it's this year.
It's this
particular year.
And which is exactly what I was getting to, that I agree with you. I don't know if anything that plays out here at the BAFTAs means anything. Because I was also seeing some sentiments before we saw what the winners were going to be for the BAFTAs as it relates to Anora. Especially, some people were saying, well, Anora at least has to win screenplay here. If it doesn't win screenplay, then who knows, maybe it's in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah.
And I saw those tweets and I was like, I don't know if I buy that this year. Maybe in a lot of other years, those stats do mean something. But Anora has already won a lot. Won a lot. We noted this quite prominently on the show last week with PGA and DGA, Critics' Choice. It's won some pretty big awards, and I don't know if it needs BAFTAs to solidify itself. Now, we'll get SAG next week on the show. Perhaps that will, cement its place as far as the Oscars is concerned. But as it stands right now, I feel like Anora has done enough that losing the screenplay for the BAFTAs in a year where traditional stats don't really mean all that much, I think Anora is still sitting just fine, especially when you couple it with it misses out on screenplay here, but Mikey Madison wins for actress. So it just kind of makes up for that loss anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and then you also have a Real Pain winning for a screenplay award for best original screenplay specifically, which is nice to see for Jesse Eisenberg.
And that means that the substance also loses here, and that might be its biggest. That's probably the biggest competition.
Yeah.
Other than maybe a Real Pain itself.
I see what you're saying too. That there has been, in many ways, most Oscar seasons, if not all Oscar seasons over the past few decades, have always done a good job deviating up their wins in a certain way. So if a movie is going to go on to win Best Picture, it also has to have at least a Best Director or some Best Screenplay win under its belt, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe it's only going to win 2 Oscars, but those 2 Oscars would end up being Best Picture and or Screenplay or Director, right? That's usually the case.
Yes.
But as we've seen with Critics' Choice, Anora goes on to win Best Picture, but nothing else. That's kind of weird, right?
Mm-hmm.
If there's any Oscar season that something like that could happen, I feel like this is the one. So
so
to that point, if Anora goes on to win Best Picture at the Academy Awards and maybe something else, but not screenplay or director, like the history seems to suggest, this is one of those years I won't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I won't be surprised either. And honestly, looking at the BAFTA winners here, I think what we see here is a real possibility when you look at, and I'm talking about the top categories here, right?
Yeah.
So you have Culkin win for supporting actor. That's going to happen. Zeldana, supporting actress, that's going to happen. Adrian Brody, actor, very likely
most likely going to happen.
Most likely. Now, Mikey Madison wins the BAFTA, but I think we can all say fairly confidently that Demi Moore is still in the lead for actress. Now, that race is getting a little spicier, to be fair. Yeah. I don't think that she has it locked down.
Well, that's why SAG is going to be really important when we get to that.
For sure. Yeah. So all of this might be moot by next week. However, I do think that as it stands right now, and for the sake of my argument that I'm making here, let's just say that Demi Moore does win the Oscar for Best Actress. And no one will be surprised by that, right? So those are your 4 acting winners. You get to adapted screenplay. Conclave seems that it has that category locked down. And you get to original screenplay. If A Real Pain wins, are you going to be totally surprised? Probably not. If The Substance wins, you're especially not going to be surprised. I think it is very possible that Anora misses out on screenplay as well, as we saw at Critics' Choice alongside BAFTAs here. And then you get to director, where Brady Corbet wins the BAFTA here. And again, that's not too much of a surprise with the BAFTAs, especially we were all anticipating that it was going to be Brady Corbet. If he goes on to win the Oscar, I don't think we'll be all that surprised either. I think there's a real possibility that Critics' Choice, for all of the grief it gets in predicting the Oscars, might get it right. Like, I think there's a real, just because you have to throw out the stats this year. It's just such a weird year where I could see the BAFTAs, like the winners here that we're describing, minus Mikey Madison. Like, you could see those winners at the Oscars as well, and somehow Anora still wins Best Picture.
I still wouldn't be surprised.
I won't be surprised at all.
I know, and you know, we did comment on Conclave winning Best Film at the BAFTAs. I don't think that's happening at the Oscars personally. In a way, though, I wouldn't be surprised if it does, just given the topical nature of that film and how it kind of mirrors the Oscars race in many ways. I feel like it becomes kind of a meta win by default. I jokingly said it should win Best Documentary at this point because it is kind of exactly that
funny
thing. So in a way, I wouldn't be surprised if it did win Best Film at the Oscars, but I also would be surprised. I feel like it's still most likely that an Anora or a Brutalist, for instance, is going to take that award home come Oscar night.
I mean, it's going to get screenplay, so
it is, yeah.
It's not too crazy of a stretch to say that it also, especially given how Best Picture is awarded with the ballot, if it lingers there in that 2-3 spot on a lot of ballots, if not number 1.
I know that we've talked about this. I feel like Anora is more likely that film that's giving it that edge on the preferential ballot, but maybe Conclave is the other film. I know a lot of people are trying to argue that a complete unknown is that one, but I don't think it is.
I don't think so either. But let me ask you this though.
Okay.
When we're really digging into that a little bit, what would be the difference be, especially in a scenario where Anora wins nothing else and somehow wins Best Picture? Again, as we talked about, would not be surprised if that happens. However, when you're talking about the preferential ballot, in that scenario, Conclave at least has screenplay.
Yeah.
So you would think that it would have just as many votes up at the top. And that film isn't nearly as divisive or polarizing as a Sean Baker. So I don't.
If there is a disparity, it's peanuts.
Where sure. I think it's very possible that it lingers very similarly there.
Has there ever been a tie for Best Picture at the Oscars?
I don't know.
No, there definitely hasn't been. I know. I said that out loud as a question, but I actually meant it more facetiously. It hasn't been, but that'd be funny if something like that were to happen.
Well, I get the reason I say I don't know is because a lot of this is very political. Let's be honest. Has there ever been a scenario where things have been tied up until the very, very end? That I would not be surprised. How they determined a winner based off that tie. Maybe there were some backroom dealings. I'm not accusing the Academy of ever being conspiratorial or anything like that. However, I would not be surprised if on occasion there was a scenario like we saw with like a conclave kind of, political maneuverings happening.
Apparently, the last time there was ever a tie in any way, shape, or form at the Oscars was in 2013 for Best Sound Editing, which apparently went to both Zero Dark 30 and Skyfall. But that's, I think, 1 in 6 times that any award has ended in a tie at the Academy.
Well, I think the preferential ballot kind of removes any sort of possibility, that, right? Because they just keep voting until there's a winner,
right?
So, yeah, I mean, the way the system is set up now, and maybe it was something like that. When did the preferential ballot come in? Was that 2008? Maybe it was even before that.
That's a good question.
Or was 2008 when they expanded from 5 to 10? Maybe that's what I'm thinking.
That was 2009. I know the last year, 2009, or at least it was the 2010 ceremony celebrating 2009 films was the first time we saw 10 nominees, at least in a long time.
Yeah, exactly. Since the 40s, right? Is that when I'm trying to recall? Because we did that.
The 40s, maybe in some aspects of the 50s, but the 40s for sure. After we did that Best Picture series.
Yeah, I want to say part of the way through that 40s decade, it did get down to 5. If I'm not mistaken.
I like how we're just bringing up more random questions as we talk about this.
I know, we're just got to get to it here. At any rate, I am just curious. Like, I think there's a path for both Conclave and Anora here, I guess is what I'm saying. And if it's not going to be The Brutalist, and ultimately I do hope that it is, that would be the film that I would vote for if, because Nickel Boys doesn't have a shot.
Gosh, I hope that just weird.
I
hope Nickel Boys weirdly wins screenplay, so at least gets acknowledged in something.
That would be awesome. I would fall out of my chair. I'm probably going to do that anyway because I'm going to be super, super wasted. But
at this rate, the members of the Academy should just surprise us. Award Nickel Boys with screenplay, and then when it comes to best film, I don't know, give it to Doom Part 2 or something, or give it to The Substance.
Yeah, let's go weird. Best sound,
weird.
Wild Robot. Let's do it.
Let's
get inspired.
I love it. And going back to your other question, when we did our 1940s Best Picture series, the last time that we saw 10 nominees at the Oscars was 1943. So that answers that question.
So I was right. I thought that it was during that decade.
Yeah, you were right.
So we haven't seen 10 nominees in a long time until 2009. I don't know if the preferential ballot started then in 2009 or if that came a little bit later, but either way, I like the system, the way it's set up currently, and obviously it'll avoid that whole tie scenario. But I do wonder how deep the voting could go if Conclave and Nora the Brutalist are kind of fighting it up at the top. And look, it's a weird season. And because it's a weird season and there's so much that is unpredictable, you still can't count out Emilio Perez, even though you would think that the controversies would hinder that film. And in all likelihood, that's probably going to be the case. But
I think so, except for Zoe Saldana.
Except for Saldana, she's going to win.
Maybe one of the song.
I still think it's going to win song.
Yeah.
I think song and supporting actress are locked up regardless. I think if we're talking about the controversies hurting that film, it's in all the other categories.
I just wonder how they're going to acknowledge it at the ceremony, the controversy of that film right now and everything surrounding it, because at this point it's such an elephant in the room that I feel like Conan as the host has to acknowledge it in his opening monologue. It has to be brought up. I don't think there's any way around it at this point.
I don't think there is either. I'm really, really curious how Conan handles it. But I love Conan. I think he's going to do a great job.
I think he's great.
So I think we're in good hands in that regard, but I am still very curious how he goes about bringing that up as the ceremony goes. And Emilio Perez, circling back to the BAFTAs, does still win here for foreign language film. So the controversies did not hurt it at the BAFTAs. Right. Does it repeat for international film at the Oscars? I still think it's very possible.
I think so. It might.
There's a lot of momentum building for I'm Still Here, though.
That's the one I was going to say, and I think it's surprising. It's surprising. Best Picture nomination is also enough to give it that that narrative, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if it goes in that direction as well.
Yeah. Another thing that I find interesting, and Matt Neglia brought this up earlier. No Other Land has not won any major award this season.
Jeez.
And it loses here to Superman, the Christopher Reeve story. I don't know. I am a little nervous about that. I think No Other Land is quite easily the best doc of the year. Certainly the most important film of the documentaries in 2024. Man, I just I am getting a little nervous about that.
One thing I wonder about that, though, and this is something our editor-in-chief, Dave Giannini, talked about when we had him on for our top 10 show and our award show, was the idea of access being a huge talking point when it came to films in 2024 and how not everything is just available. I feel like if there's any voting body that has most likely seen No Other Land, whether it be in a screener or in some other form, I feel like it might be members of the Academy. I at least hope it's members of the Academy. So that idea of access might actually, I don't want to say help it in this case, because I think it's still a problem, but I do wonder if more people in that community have seen the film to maybe hopefully give it that edge.
Yeah, I would hope so. The other thing that comes to mind, and this is admittedly very cynical of me, but I can't help, given the state of the world, think that this is also very possible in the sense that, let's say they do have access to it, because the Academy members are obviously very privileged. All of these studios, production companies, they want to win the Oscar. So they're going to make sure, even though that film has no distribution whatsoever, it's possible that they still got their hands on it. Clearly, the documentary branch did. So if they got their hands on it, they were probably able to share it with the rest of the Academy. However, are the other branches going out of their way to watch that movie? That's a question
That's a good question.
that I have. And the reason I bring it up is because I think there's potentially a significant percentage of the Academy that is avoiding it because of their own political stances.
Or they,
they don't even want to touch it, let alone vote for it.
They just want nothing to do with it because they're just too afraid of the narrative.
Yeah. Or they just flatly disagree with the politics of it, which is
possible. It's possible.
A whole other can of worms. But I think that is possible. I think that's very, very possible. So like, I don't know what, maybe it's a combination of all those factors that are kind of at the root of all of this, but
well, I mean, we talked about this when we reviewed the movie, or at least when we talked about it during our catch-up episode, and we also acknowledged this during our award show, is that it's a movie that does feel dangerous. It feels like it's lifting this confidential curtain of sorts that makes you feel kind of unclean while watching it. And that's something we like about the film. That's something we want to challenge people to participate in and to see these stories, right? But that's, you know, perhaps just an off-putting idea for some people. And I certainly get that. I don't sympathize with it, but I certainly get it. And that could also be part of it as well.
I agree. To emphasize your point earlier, as far as throwing out all the stats, with how crazy and weird this season has been, same thing with animation.
Oh,
The
the Brits love their Wallace and Gromit. Yeah,
they love Wallace and Gromit.
That almost doesn't count
all.
in the statistics here. You could just get rid of that statistic here.
Okay, I mean, but this doesn't happen all the time. To be fair, I mean they've been a precursor before, often with that category as well.
But when's the last time they had a purely British film nominated that is about basically British humor and British lifestyle?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, I fully suspected that this was going to be the case, that they were going to go with Wallace and Gromit for animation and family film. They love Wallace and Gromit. They were, of course, going to vote for it.
That's like if they had a category for best comedy or something like that here at the BAFTAs, and one year there was a movie about Monty Python nominated. Of course, that's automatically going to win that award for them. Yeah,
exactly. I just think the timing of Wallace and Gromit coming out in 2024 is hilarious, because this is a year where animation is really tight in terms of the race. Really tight.
A lot of good stuff.
So a lot of us we're looking forward to the BAFTAs to be like, did they go Wild Robot or did they go Flow? It's gone back and forth all season. This is a coin toss. This is 50-50 as far as this race goes. What do the BAFTAs do? And of course, they don't go in either direction. They go with the British film.
Yeah, they go with the British film.
Just adds to the chaos, which I do admire and respect. I love that. I love that it just adds fuel to the fire. Incredible.
And I love that it's a film like that adding the fuel to the fire. Just hilarious to me.
So funny. Do you have any other BAFTA takes here?
I don't think so. And I was looking at best documentary. Was kind of surprised to see Superman, a Christopher Reeve story, win there. I don't think it's really been in the talking, or it hasn't really been in the conversation that much outside of it, from what I understand.
And I don't think that doc is even nominated at the Oscars. So
I don't think it is, and that's more or less why I brought it up. I was kind of secretly hoping to see a movie like Kneecap win Best Casting, which I thought was a really inspired nomination. But I mean, nonetheless, it goes to the movie that I think we all kind of expected it to go to, and that being Anora, at least of those. Actually, I don't know. I mean, Conclave being right there, you might think something like that would actually, make its way up there. But honestly, outside of a few things that we talked about, I'm not too surprised by what we're seeing here. I don't know if we're ready to say it's about to foreshadow what we're going to see on Oscar night, because this is just not that award season. It's not that award season. And we still have SAG coming up pretty soon. And if that goes in a completely new direction, then I kind of hope it does. I want to see as much chaos in this award season as possible. So we'll see. We'll report back in a week and see if there's anything new to hypothesize around.
Yeah. I'm sure so much of this conversation will change within the next week or so.
Yeah.
Another thing that I thought was interesting, and obviously in hindsight makes a lot of sense, is that Conclave wins for editing at the BAFTA. I don't know if that's going to be regurgitated at the Oscars. I could very much see that going to Sean Baker.
Me too.
Or even The Brutalist at the Oscars. Now, if it does win the Oscar, then perhaps my hypothesis a moment ago of Conclave being in that 1, 2, 3 spot pretty consistently might be true, which would give it, like a significant chance of winning Best Picture. I mean, if it wins editing and it's going to win screenplay, even if it misses out on director, and obviously there are no acting wins, editing and screenplay I think would be enough. That's all it needs.
It has enough to back up a potential Best Picture win. At least it's got the historical stats backing it up. Yeah. Because I don't know what else it would win. I don't think it will win anything else. No.
It's not going to be costume. What else is it in? I'm trying to look here at the. It's in costume, and I think, and then score, and it's not going to win score. That's going to be not going to win score.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think its only opportunities here is screenplay and editing.
Yep, I think so.
So I think if it and we know it's going to win screenplay, or it's very likely unless there's a huge surprise.
Yeah,
but if it picks up editing,
that's going to change course mid Oscar night.
Yeah, that might be our next Best Picture winner, possibly.
And we've seen that happen before, where something like that happens in the middle of the ceremony, and then all of a sudden, everyone in our critics circle is tweeting, "Well, we got our nominations wrong. It's going to go this way now." So it could be one of those situations.
Yeah, and it could be one of those where we think it's going to change and then it doesn't. I think of Mad Max Fury Road, for example, because it won like 5 awards in a row. And we were like, oh no, is George Miller going to upset and take director? And then you get to all of the above the line categories and it played out pretty much.
Played out exactly. Yeah.
So,
well, this is what we learned. Not every Oscar season is the same. And this one's especially different.
Especially this one for sure.
Yeah, I love this season. I mean, it's not the greatest crop of films, but it's the coolest Oscar season as far as the awards race itself. It's just wild. It's weird. It's goofy. It's stupid. I like it. It's
so good. All right, we have something very interesting to talk about here.
Announcement time.
Next week, we are continuing our Best Picture movie series.
Exciting. It's been a year since we did this. We're getting back to it.
Year. We started this last year, and we began in the 1940s, which was a really, really fun decade, going through all of the movies in the 1940s. And we are now moving into a different decade. However, we are going to Tarantino this movie series.
We're doing this on purpose, just to be a bit weird with it.
Order. We're not going to go in chronological order. Obviously, we started in the 40s. We didn't even go all the way back to the 1920s or the 30s. And since we're going to discombobulate this series, we decided to move. We're going to jump from the 40s and we're going to move to the 1960s.
Yeah.
So we're moving 20 years from 1940. So we're going to go through the 60s. We're going to start with The Apartment and then West Side Story, followed by Lawrence of Arabia, Tom Jones, My Fair Lady, The Sound of Music, A Man for All Seasons, In the Heart of the Night, Oliver, and Midnight Cowboy. That's a pretty solid list, not going to lie.
That's why we chose the 60s.
Tom Jones is a blind spot. I have not seen Tom Jones, so that will be a first-time watch for me.
I haven't seen A Man of All Seasons either. So there are a few blind spots here that I'm looking forward to seeing for the first time. Some of these, though, we have reviewed in some way on the InSession Film Podcast back during the extra film days when we had Ryan McQuaid and Jay Ledbetter, such as Lawrence of Arabia, which I believe I joined them for that episode, which will make for an interesting, I guess, reprisal for this one. It might just be more so you doing most of the talking this time,
Perhaps,
JD, so we have another reference point there. But there are a lot of heavy hitters there that I can't wait to talk about.
Yeah, and Lawrence of Arabia is going to be really fun because I have such a weird history with that movie.
Okay.
The first time, and I believe I've talked about this on the show, the first time I saw that film, I was somewhat mixed on it. I did not love it.
I remember that.
One of those, I guess, against the grain kind of movies for me.
Sure.
And then I rewatched the movie and completely changed my perspective on it.
Don't you love when that happens? Where it's like you can admit that you were wrong and you were just a naive little child when you saw it for the first time. I've had those too.
Pretty much what happened. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting into these movies. I think it's going to be a really great decade to cover. And we're going to start that next week on the show. And we'll do that over the course of the next 10 weeks. And that will lead us right into the summer movie season. So
well timed.
I'm very, very excited to get into that. So stay tuned. Be on the lookout. Get your 1960s Best Picture winners watch list together.
Yeah.
And join us because this is going to be a great time.
Looking forward to it.
So stay with us. We're going to start this next week, episode 625. It is happening next week as we will begin with, of course, The Apartment, which won the Oscar in 1960. So subscribe to the show. Stay tuned. We'll see you next week for our Best Picture movie series. All right, Brendan, are you a better man?
I try to be. I'm a better man when I'm listening to Robbie Williams.
Yeah. So let's talk about Better Man, a film that came out just a few weeks ago. It is available now on digital. We, of course, have 5 digital codes to give away. I think the people are going to be real excited about this one.
I hope people do, yeah.
Has been in the discourse in some big ways over the last few weeks. A lot of people championing this film. It did not do very well at the box office, unfortunately. And it's become one of those biopics that people are mostly raving about, trying to get people to go see it, trying to urge people to check it out.
I love that narrative. I really do. I think this is sort of the makings of a potential cult favorite in a way. I don't know if cult favorite's the right word, but I think people are starting to devise a narrative around it. And I think that's great because it's a movie that might earn it. It might deserve it.
I do agree with you. I think wherever this lands, and I forget who distributed this. Is this going to be a Warner Brothers Max situation?
That is a great question.
I really do not remember who distributed this.
This was distributed by Paramount.
Paramount. Okay, so Paramount Plus, be on the lookout.
There you go. At least distributed by Paramount here in the States. It was Roadshow Films over in Australia.
Okay.
And just a few other
for
places,
those in the States, look out for on Paramount. I do think once it becomes more accessible, I noted that it's on digital right now for you to rent and check out, unless you get one of our free codes.
Yeah,
we got that going. We're going to give those out later this week. But generally, I think once it gets more accessible, and you know how this happens all the time on Netflix, right? Where a movie from 15 years ago somehow lands on Netflix and it becomes the #1 streaming movie for 2 weeks. Like it just,
I know
these things happen all the time these days. I think Better Man is a movie, especially because people are hyping it up, that once it becomes available, I think are going to get a lot more eyeballs on it, and it probably will become some sort of cult favorite. People are really digging the movie. I admit I fully don't love the film. I have my issues with it. I do think it is very conventional from a writing perspective, but the gimmick of the film is undeniable. It is really terrific. And I think people are rightfully having a lot of fun with that element of the movie.
If there's anything about the movie outside of just that gimmick that's really going to push it into cult stardom, if you will, there are individual sequences here that I think are going to be remembered in the realm of movie musicals, modern movie musicals specifically. The most of the narrative is around those particular sequences, and rightfully so. They are so well done. They are among the best movie musical sequences that we've seen over the past almost 20 years, right? I think some of those sequences are that good.
Yeah, and look, even on a first go, I very much did enjoy that. I will also say this, Better Man is one of those movies where even if you are somewhat reserved on it, as I was on a first go around, knowing what it is, it's going to be one of those movies that is so much more enjoyable on a second viewing.
It's going to get better for a lot of people.
It's going to get better the more you watch it. The gimmick is just really that good. And to your point, the musical numbers are extravagant. They're extraordinary, excellent, all the E words. It's fan-freaking-tastic.
Well said. Yeah, great movie.
Thank you. So go check it out. Again, it's on digital right now. If you want to win a digital code, we have 5 of them to give away. Follow us on Twitter, @InSession Film, or Instagram, @InSession Film. We will put out some posts later on this week with opportunities for you to win one of these digital codes. Again, follow us on social media. We will put out a post, engage with the post, and maybe you'll win. Maybe you'll win one of these digital codes for a Better Man. So
maybe.
With that said, thanks to Better Man for their support.
Yeah.
And we'll see you guys on social media. All right, Brendan, let's talk about NordVPN. Let's talk
Security.
about safe
It's the name of the
travels
game.
on the internet.
Yep.
Yes. All about security. So if you're traveling, let's say, maybe to Canada to watch a hockey game,
Watch a
perhaps.
hockey game. Yeah.
Yeah. But you want to enjoy the benefits of your paid subscriptions as you travel, NordVPN is the solution. It is fast, extremely secure, protecting you from the prying eyes that people have online by changing your IP address as you surf the internet. It secures online traffic through encryption, making it hard to spy on or to hijack your data. Which
That's important.
is
That's important.
Very, very important.
I mean, our digital identities have never been more at risk than ever before, right, JD? So it's important to have something like this. And the great thing about NordVPN is that it is available on all major operating systems, smart TVs, routers. Their Threat Protection Pro helps block malware, ads, malicious sites, and trackers, and everything like that. Voted the best VPN by PC Mag, Forbes, Wired, Tech Advisor, and many other outlets as well.
Absolutely. Just securing its place as far as the best VPN out there. They have 7,200 servers in 118 countries. The options are completely endless. The speeds are remarkable with NordVPN. And if that wasn't enough, NordVPN doesn't track user activity. And it's able to kill, to protect your connection if anything is disrupted. If there's any sort of issue, they're able to stop it immediately. So check out NordVPN. You can get 30 days for free with our link, which you will find in the description of this episode. Just go to the description, click on the link, and you'll get 30 days for free. Simply the best out there. Stay connected wherever you go. And we thank NordVPN for their support. Okay, with all of that said, we are going to transition now to our Harrison Ford draft. And what's fun about this is going to be really, really fun. With our Harrison Ford draft, we have decided to forego the movies themselves, which I think is really fun because it does make this a little bit more challenging. You can't just pick, a specific Star Wars movie or Indiana Jones movie.
Or multiple Star Wars movies on your list.
Yes. Yeah. And honestly, there would be a lot of Indiana Jones and Star Wars if we were just going by movie.
It'd be boring. It'd be really boring.
Yeah. So we're going to go by character, Harrison Ford characters, not the movies themselves. And the other thing that's also interesting about that too is when you look at some of his early filmography, he has some pretty small roles in some incredible movies. Yeah. And I don't know how fair that is to the Harrison Ford legacy when he has a small cameo appearance in Apocalypse Now, for example.
Yeah,
that doesn't really count.
There are 3 roles of his in the 70s specifically where I thought about this and whether we even want to consider it for the celebration of Harrison Ford's legacy. In many ways we could, and I think the argument could be made for that, but him playing essentially a nameless colonel in the opening scene of Apocalypse Now, like you mentioned, that's a bit of an outlier for me. There's also his brief role in American Graffiti. He's very good in that film, but he only has about 5 minutes of screen time. Exactly. I'd say maybe the one where I can almost argue it's okay to consider is his brief performance in The Conversation, the Francis Ford Coppola film. Sure. Because he's in that film for a very short amount of time, but he actually does leave a pretty significant impression. So like maybe that's the one that could be a bit more of a considerable one. But I think for the most part, it's those predate the Harrison Ford that we've come to know. So maybe we'll talk about other ones instead.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we wanted to focus on characters rather than the films themselves. Because even in the context of characters, if you want to include something like Martin Stett, his character in The Conversation, he does leave an impression. So that, as brief of a stint as that is, you could consider something like that, and I could see the appeal of voting for a performance like that. Whereas his little role in Apocalypse Now doesn't leave an impression.
And you could tell how nervous he was during the filming of that scene. And I think he's even been very vocal about that too.
Yeah, exactly. So all of that aside, we are condensing this to characters. So Indiana Jones is all of the films. Han Solo is all of the films, and so on and so forth. That is how we are going to do this draft.
Yeah.
Other than that, it's going to be just like every other draft we've done. We'll do a little bit of a coin flip here, and we'll snake it as we always do.
This is going to be tricky because I think in the case of Harrison Ford, JD, the coin flip is going to be very important, probably more so than ever before here.
Perhaps. All right. I have the coin in front of me.
Okay.
It's a digital one. Do you want to call it?
Yeah, I'll call it. Tell me when I need to call it.
All right, go ahead and call it.
All right, heads.
All right, I'm flipping it, and it is tails.
Oh, so you're first. Go ahead.
All right. I don't know. I kind of wish that I was going second.
Honestly, I'm kind of glad I didn't get it.
Yeah, I know.
Well, it's all set in stone. Well,
yeah. All right, here we go.
Here we go. I think I know who you're going to go with first. And
all right, I'm going to go with Indiana Jones.
That's what I thought.
You got to go with the obvious one here. There are two that he's most prominently known for. He's done a lot of great films, has many great characters, but at the end of the day, his legacy comes down to two rather big characters as far as the zeitgeist is concerned anyway. So I'm going to go with Indiana Jones to start things off here for obvious reasons. We all know the character. We all love him.
Yeah. And he's, he has a lot of great roles, as you're talking about there, that are very iconic for his movie stardom. But this is the one where he led a franchise, right? So it's really significant in that regard. All right, so then it's my turn. So then it's going to be me, and then it's Snakes, right? So then I'll get two picks here, right?
Yep, you'll get two
All right,
picks.
so then first I'll pick Han Solo. I feel like that's the other obvious one. And of course, the second obvious one, I'll go with Rick Deckard from Blade Runner.
Yep, of course. Blade Runner.
Yep.
Those are.
And I don't think I need to explain why. This is why maybe we can do 10 here. I know we've been going back and forth as to whether we do 5 picks or 10, but some of these we can go by so quickly. But we'll see. We'll see how things go. We may have some fights. We may have some fights brewing here.
As far as these rounds go, I'm going to be real curious how the later rounds go. Yeah, the early rounds are quite easily. It was always going to be Indiana Jones, Han Solo, Deckard. Those were going to be the first ones here.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I will say this before you get into your next pick here, with regard to Rick Deckard. I feel like in many ways, even though this is still kind of a franchisable character for him, I feel like it's the one that really started to foreshadow the deeper side of Harrison Ford that we would see in other movies in the mid to late 80s and even 90s. There's a lot of nuance to Rick Deckard that showcase the artful side and the complexities of Harrison Ford, which is what I love about him. Like what's so great about him is that he has this this tough exterior, but there's a real sensitive side to him as well. Like he somehow is able to balance both of these extremes so easily and effortlessly. And I think Rick Deckard especially is a great example as to how he's able to do that so well.
Yeah, I agree. I love that character. That would have obviously been, those would have been the two I went with if I was in your position. So
right. Yeah.
Totally agree. All right. This is where things get interesting. I think there are several characters you could choose from here.
Yeah, I don't want to say anything. I'm going to let you pick one first before I say anything.
All right. The next one I'm going with is Dr. Richard Kimball from The Fugitive.
Then I will say this. I think that was the obvious next pick.
Okay. I agree as well. Yeah. But I do think in terms of, let's say, the late 80s through the 90s, there are some notable films and characters here that I would say, at least in terms of the zeitgeist, people know and admire these films and performances. Yeah. But yeah, I agree. That's probably the next logical step. It is.
Well, I really wanted this one as well. This is again why the coin flip was so important for this draft. I think this might be my favorite Harrison Ford performance. I don't know if it's necessarily my favorite role of his. That might still be Rick Deckard, but I think this is his best performance, especially given how he's
really
able to carry this film. Yeah.
Yeah. It's certainly up there for me as well. That first Blade Runner, he is an all-timer. That might be my favorite performance of his. But this is very much in that conversation. I do agree. All right, my next one is perhaps obvious as well. I'm going with Jack Ryan.
Okay.
So he's got a couple of films under Jack Ryan as well.
He's got 2 films, and it's not the first time we've seen Jack Ryan on screen. I think the first time was when Alec Baldwin portrayed him in The Hunt for Red October, if I'm not mistaken.
Also a good movie.
Yeah, very good movie. In a way, I think I would have liked to see Harrison Ford play him back in that movie. So we had this weird unofficial Jack Ryan trilogy to tie to Harrison Ford as well. But I do like his 2 four-ways, if you will, into the Jack Ryan universe.
I agree.
I think Clear and Present Danger is probably the better of the 2 from what I remember between that and Patriot Games. But I think they're both very effective films.
I agree. I really like them both as well. I haven't seen them in quite a few years, but Clear and Present Danger is probably my favorite of them, of the 2 as well.
I think that's the common.
I think they're both really good, especially early 90s thrillers.
Yeah. I don't think that's much of a, not really much of a hot take. I think both those films are kind of equally considered very good, but I think most people seem to think Clear and Present Danger is the better of the 2.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're not presenting some sort of epiphany.
No. We're not presenting a hot take here on Harrison Ford.
Yeah. No one's writing a thesis against the going counterculture here.
Yeah.
So Jack Ryan, 2 really good solid movies. That is my next pick here. So we are back to you.
Back to me. So snaking back to me, I'm going to go with John Book from Witness next.
See that was the other one I was heavily considering here. Honestly, I think I prefer that film and that character more than Jack Ryan. I just think Jack Ryan has more of a cultural.
You're picking it for the hopeful votes that might come from it, because we're gonna put these out there as a competition between you and I. So I get why you did that, and I may have done the same thing, honestly. But I'm with you. I think John Book, or at least his performance as John Book in Witness, is the better performance. It's the only time he's been nominated for an Oscar, and it's easy to see why, because in many ways he's
fantastic. Yeah,
he's great in it. And it's sort of the turning point for Harrison Ford in many ways. I talked about how we sensed that with his performance as Rick Deckard in Blade Runner, how we saw both of these sides finally coming together. But his performance as John Book, I think, was sort of the commercialization of this new era of Harrison Ford. I mean, John Book is the reason why we get to the likes of Patriot Games and Clear and Present Danger. And
for sure. Yeah.
So it really is a significant performance for him.
Yeah, because up until that point, all we had really seen from Harrison Ford was Star Wars and Indiana Jones, outside of small roles in Apocalypse Now and American Graffiti, The Conversation, and obviously a few others as well. But yeah, Witness was kind of that first foray into doing, I hate to call it Oscar drama, but something outside of the franchise filmmaking, where he has a prominent leading role like that, and he only goes on to get nominated for an Oscar. Like, unreal.
It's the only time he's been nominated for an Oscar too, which is kind of baffling. We'll talk about whether they make our picks. We might have more to say about some of his other roles, but he should have been nominated a few times, honestly. I mentioned with The Fugitive. He should have been nominated for The Fugitive. He absolutely should have been.
Oh, for The Fugitive, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, I still think Blade Runner is one of his very, very best performances. That might be the performance for me, but I understand why it wouldn't garner something like an Oscar nomination.
Well, even so, at the time, it was not very well received, given the particular cut that the studios forced out of Ridley Scott. So I can kind of see it being ignored until it was actually, revitalized and people found that it was a good movie.
For sure. And I understand, the history, the context of it all. The other one for me, and maybe this is a little, maybe I'm a little bit on an island here. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I would have nominated him for The Force Awakens. I would have.
I think he's very good in it. I think he's very good in that movie.
I think that's also one of his very best performances in a film that isn't as beloved as the first three across the board. Now, I think The Force Awakens is one of the very best Star Wars movies, but
think it's very good.
can concede that that isn't the consensus opinion. And I think that his performance in that is maybe the best of the Star Wars. And I think it is honestly one of the best supporting performances of that year. It is so counterintuitive to that character.
Sure.
And I think he absolutely slays that role. I think it is really, really great.
I think he's very good in that too. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Yeah, I think it's a very good iteration of Han Solo in that one. So then, okay, so I picked John Book as my third pick.
But yeah, that's a good pick. I like that one.
Yeah, so then it's still Snake to me. So I still have another pick here, I think.
So back to you.
And this is where it gets challenging, even more challenging than before. I think for my next pick, I'm looking at the three I have here. I think I need something that represents the like the cable TV thriller side of Harrison Ford in some ways.
Okay.
I mean, in a way, I hate to call a movie like Patriot Games or Clear and Present Danger quote unquote cable TV thrillers, but they kind of have that aura, especially for those of us that grew up in the TNT era, right?
Yeah.
But I think another great one that certainly has its iconic moments is President James Marshall from Air Force One. So I'm going to go with that next.
Yeah, that would have been easily my next pick as well. Yeah, I think that's
especially one of the most iconic lines from any Harrison Ford performance and Get Off My Plane.
Yeah. No, that's another one of those somewhat iconic moments for Harrison Ford. You have that line. It's a really fun, diverting movie. He is committed to it as he always does.
Oh, sure.
Really great. Yeah, really
it's a good movie
pick.
too. Yeah, it's a really good thriller.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Really like that one a lot.
All right, your turn.
All right, so back to me. And this is where things get quite tricky, I think. The rest of these characters, I think, is a bit of a toss-up. All right. Where should I go next?
I don't know. You tell me.
Well, you see, and here's now what I'm having to juggle, because there are performances here that I subjectively really, really like. And then there are performances that are probably more commercial, if that makes sense, more accessible or more in the zeitgeist. So that's what I'm having to kind of juggle here. Let's see.
Looking at my list. Yeah, there's like 30 we could pick from here to kind of fill out our top fives, right?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I'm just having to talk and because I don't honestly,
well, as you're talking, maybe I'll look for the ghost in your background. We can, be a little bit productive here.
Yeah, because I just there's a lot of other performances here, but nothing that really grabs me. You know what? I think I'm just gonna do it. You know what? Screw it.
Are you going with your heart? Is that what I'm hearing from you?
I'm gonna go with my heart here. Yeah.
Oh,
this is not gonna be a popular pick, but I do think this is underratedly one of his better performances, especially of the last 15 years.
Okay, I'm looking at my list. Where could you be going with this? I'm genuinely curious.
I think and again, Harrison Ford doesn't really ever phone it in. He's always really committed in his performances. But there's one that I think is good and in a somewhat underrated movie too. I'm going with William Jones.
I kind of knew you were going with that one. Just given the way you phrased that, I felt like you were going with The Age of Adeline, weren't you?
The Age of Adeline. He's so good in that movie. He's so good in that movie.
Honestly, I don't hate that movie at all, but I think the reason why I don't hate it is primarily because of Harrison Ford. I think
because of him,
Yeah, he's really the redeeming factor there.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think part of why that performance stands out is the 10 years kind of leading up to that performance leaves a little bit to be desired, or at least in terms of the overall films. He wasn't making, let's say, the greatest of choices in terms of the movies.
Sure.
And so we hadn't seen anything extraordinary from him in quite a while. And that one comes along and reinforces why he's actually one of the best working in Hollywood. And a film that probably a lot of people overlooked or didn't really have much expectations for. And admittedly, I didn't have much expectations for it. Maybe that's part of why I was surprised by the film. I think it is a fine little movie, really charming, and he's genuinely incredible.
Yeah, he really does take it seriously. Really he's good in it. I agree with you, man.
So, gonna go with William Jones there. All right, so then that circles back to me for my fifth pick here. And similarly, I'm like looking at, and maybe it's, I could be conflating performances with the films themselves, because I'm not in love with a lot of these films, to be perfectly honest with you. However, you know, he truly never phones it in. He always gives a good performance. So I have to kind of separate those two a little bit. Okay. Let's go with
there's a few here I really want to try to prioritize, and I hope you don't take any of them.
Let's go with Sabrina.
Oh, interesting. Okay, you're going with Linus Larrabee.
Linus Larrabee. Yep. Yeah, I'm gonna go with that one, and this is me just kind of picking from films that I don't fully love as much as some of these other ones. I do like the movie overall. I think it's fine. I'm not in love with that movie by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's a fine little Sidney Pollack film. But again, he's really good, really charming. I like it.
It's a remake too, so it has the burden of being constantly compared to its counterpart being directed by Billy Wilder. So it's got that maybe working against it. But I think Sabrina is a pretty fun movie for what it was, as a 90s version of that story. Yeah.
So, I'm going to go with Larrabee. That's my fifth pick here.
All right. And I really don't know where to go with my last pick here. So I've got one more pick here to round this out. We went through this pretty quickly. Maybe we should have done 10. But I mean, at this point, we can't do 10 now because that would have completely changes things. You would have picked different numbers 4 and 5 if we knew we were doing 10. So it's completely skewed now. So we're sticking with 5, I guess, just for the sake of wrapping this up. But yeah, let's see. There are 3 here that I'm leaning towards, and I'm trying to pick who I think is the best choice here. I could pick from what I think is the best film from these 3, or the best performance of these 3, or maybe the one that's maybe perhaps the most notorious of these 3, because I feel like all 3 are very different in that regard. They each have their own, I guess, thing. I think I'm going to go with my heart on this one. I'm going to pick my favorite film of these 3, and I'm going to pick a film that's maybe more similar to like your Sabrina pick, because I don't really have the comedic side of Harrison Ford represented on my list yet. So I'm going to go with Jack Trainer from Working Girl, the Mike Nichols film.
Okay. Yeah, that's when I was going back and forth between that and Sabrina.
Yeah. I actually just caught up with Working Girl for the first time a few days ago. Actually, my wife and I watched it together. It's great. It's really, really great. I highly recommend it. Actually, one of Mike Nichols' best films, if you ask me. I think Harrison Ford's really good and charming in it, and I wanted to have that side of him represented here. I mean, in many ways, that movie is really more it's really more a Melanie Griffith movie than it is a Harrison Ford movie. He gets top billing, but it's really her movie more than anything else. He's just the romantic partner that gets involved, and he's very charming in that way. So I'm glad I have that pick here to represent that side of him, but he's also very funny in it. And this just goes to show how funny of a presence Harrison Ford can also be. So yeah, I'll go with Jack Trainer. I'll round out my list here with the little Working Girl.
No, I like it. I'm just going to be perfectly honest here. I think part of it is because of how I feel about some of these films. I was not going to be able to make as great of a case for some of these films and performances because I'm just not as strong on them once you get outside what we can call the obvious selections. If I had more of like I wish I felt about some of them a little heavier, I guess is what I'm trying to say, so I can make a better argument, but I just don't. So I did my best with Age of Adeline and Sabrina.
I think Age of Adeline's a good contemporary pick. I think if you're looking at...
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
I think if you're looking at Harrison Ford's performances in the 2010s specifically, I feel like it's The Force Awakens and The Age of Adeline in many ways. I know a lot of people do like the movie 42, for instance, but I tend to go more for his performance in something like The Age of Adeline over that film, even if I think maybe 42 is a better movie. It's kind of like just if we're looking at the Harrison Ford of it all, I can understand why you went with Adeline for your pick.
Yeah. If we're looking at just the last 15 years, nothing comes close, as far as I'm concerned, to The Force Awakens and The Age of Adeline. Those are easily his two best performances, as far as I'm concerned.
If the closest thing is his brief performance in Anchorman 2, then I think we're looking at the wrong decade, right?
No, I agree. But I think you can even go as far as back, maybe even to Air Force One. Like, I think you can even go back that far. Like, and I know there are champions for Crystal Skull. I get it. And I do love Spielberg's directorial flourishes in that film, as we can all agree that he's the GOAT. We love Spielberg. He's incredible. I don't love that film, though, on the whole. And as far as, but the Indiana Jones character, as far as this context is concerned, was already selected anyway. And it kind of falls under one umbrella.
It's already included.
So it's already included. So you remove that out of the picture. And again, going back to my sentiment a moment ago, there is just not a whole lot here that I feel all that strong about.
I think when it comes to Harrison Ford, and it's outside of The Age of Adeline, we certainly represented it with our respective lists. It's really, in many ways, from Star Wars all the way through Air Force One is really that career. I think in many ways he may have been the greatest movie star of the 1980s. If you look at everything that he was in there and that transition he made.
Early to mid 90s?
Oh, sure. Well? Yeah. I think it carried over into that. The 80s is where he was really starting to experiment. And I guess for some context, when I was trying to pick my final pick and I ended up going with Jack Trainer, the other two I was going back and forth on was one was Ali Fox from The Mosquito Coast, which I think is maybe his most notorious performance, given the fact he plays one of the most unlikable people of the 1980s. He is so vile and cruel in that movie, and he does a great job with it. The other one being the legal thriller Presumed Innocent, where he plays Rusty Savage.
And that's one I also thought about here. I did consider that one as well.
Yeah, I like that movie quite a bit, but I think as far as Harrison Ford performances are concerned, I think it's one of his best. I think in many ways he's really the thing that makes that movie worth seeing and makes it quite great. But that was the other one I was considering, but I thought maybe is that one a little bit too similar to something like John Book, for instance, and channeling those specific nuances. But even so, I think his performances in that specific era, he was doing a lot of great things.
No, I agree. I mean, I've always really loved him as a performer, and even, like I was saying with his recent output, it's less on his ability as an actor and more so, I just don't really care for many of those movies, aside from, as I noted, the Star Wars Force Awakens, which in this context isn't really a part of the conversation since it's all coupled together. Same thing with Blade Runner 2049. That's another one that, like outside of the context of this conversation, that's another great performance in recent years. Like, I love his work in that film. I love.
I should have highlighted that one. I should have highlighted that one when I mentioned the 2010s, but I only called out Star Wars and The Age of Adeline. But in many ways, his reprisal as Deckard there, I think, is maybe the best of the three in some ways.
I agree. That's why I wanted to call it out, because he's really, really good there as well. So like in the reprisal of Deckard and Han Solo, in those two films specifically, Age of Adeline, those three very much do stand out. In this context, two of those are automatically eliminated. So the Age of Adeline is the only other film that really stands out here since, as I noted, Air Force One. But when it comes to his 90s, like late 80s to 90s work, there are certainly a few that I did consider here. Yeah. And now I noted Working Girl a moment ago.
So good.
Presumed Innocent was also one that I very much considered. And maybe I should have went with that one. I don't know. Like it was just such a coin toss between that and Sabrina.
Sure.
And again, I just go back to which one has more of a pull in the zeitgeist. Like I don't know. Like again,
I don't know.
Kind of
I think such different movies, different audiences. Maybe
it really is. So I just kind of. I guess the theme of this whole thing, I just flipped a coin.
Yeah,
like
fair.
That's just kind of all that I did there.
Have you seen the movie Frantic, the Roman Polanski film?
No, that one is a blind spot for me.
Same here. Yeah, I wanted to catch up with it in preparation for this episode because I know it has its defenders. So I don't know if it is. If I were to see it in time, and maybe if I did have that passion for it, maybe I would have considered that one instead of Jack Trainer. But I didn't get a chance to see that one in time.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to see that either. Anyway, I wanted to note the whole reason I brought up all of this. I don't know how I feel about his filmography. I couldn't make a strong case for a lot of the characters outside of the obvious, because when I look at these lists here, I wouldn't even vote for me. Like in all transparency, I wouldn't.
I don't know,
and that's
dude.
where the coin toss, to your point, did very much matter.
Well, here's the thing, though. It's that like we've seen people vote on draft lists of ours before, and they will put certain weight on maybe one or two picks that someone has. And you have Indiana Jones and Dr. Richard Kimball. I mean, I know I do have Han Solo and Rick Decker, but those two you have at numbers 1 and number 2, respectively, are heavy picks. Those are good picks. I wouldn't be surprised if someone looks at that and says, those are his two best roles. I'm voting for JD no matter what. So that could still help you.
If I am top heavy, I do agree, but I think you could just make the argument that Jones, Kimball, Deckard, and Solo are kind of a wash. And then it comes down to those final three. And John Book might not have the cultural pull of Jack Ryan, but that is one of his best performances in a really, really good film. And James Marshall as well is like one of the more fun, brooding, strong.
Get off my plane.
Just pure masculinity in a great way. I love that about him in that movie. And there's going to be way more of a cultural pull there than with William Jones. So I just don't see a lot of votes coming my way, I guess is what I'm saying. Unless, to your point, people are just that in love with Indiana Jones
and I think some people will be.
Yeah. I mean, I still had fun here. But it's interesting doing this exercise, as great as he is, and I really do think he's one of the best working today. There is a lot in his filmography that, outside of his performance, I think the film itself leaves a lot to be desired.
That's fair.
I think that's just kind of one of my overall takeaways. But you're right though. Like the 80s and 90s, some really great stuff there though. You know
what we really should have done, but it's too late now, is that with regard to the coin flip that we did, we should have done it differently, that whoever wins the coin flip doesn't automatically go first. They defer if they want to go first, or they get to choose.
Yeah. Just like the NFL.
Basically,
we could do that next time. Yeah.
We'll do that next time, because it might be one of those cases where the coin flip is just as important.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But this was fun.
Really fun career, though. I mean, I do love Harrison Ford, though, on the whole. Don't get me wrong. Like, even in his mediocre movies, something like 42, he's one of the best things about that film. you know, or Cowboys and Aliens. Like he always brings it.
What
no
a
matter
horrible
how
movie,
bad.
but he's at least bringing it.
Exactly. And that's my point. Like, you know, or even with Crystal Skull, I really don't love the writing of that film as much as Spielberg does his best in terms of the direction of it. But like Harrison Ford is still Harrison Ford in that film. Like he's still Indiana Jones. So like there's a lot to like about him in that film, even if I don't love the movie.
I'm trying to think if there's ever been a time when Harrison Ford truly phoned it in. And
I just don't know if he has it in him.
I think you're right. I don't think he does have it in him, unless maybe we count some of those. He was in a few movies that counted as like those CBS made for TV thrillers, like Crossing Over and Extraordinary Measures. Maybe those are the only times, but I feel like those don't really count as movies by comparison.
Yeah.
I don't hate the movie Ender's Game, but I think there are better performances in that movie, and Harrison Ford is not bad in it, but I don't think he's necessarily the standout. But perhaps the character of Colonel Graff is not really asking to be the standout, so it's not really on him. But yeah, I looking at this list, I don't think I've ever seen him, you know, truly phone it in.
No. I mean, and I still think he's still capable of doing really, really great work. I just wish that maybe he had a better agent through the 2000s. You know, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I don't know, but he's always doing good work. You know, like I will die on the hill for him in The Force Awakens. Obviously, he's great in Blade Runner 2049. And hell, I mean, we don't do TV, but his work in Shrinking is some of his best.
It's
work.
Amazing. I love Shrinking so much. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, that's easily some of his best work. So, like, he's gonna be great no matter what. No matter what. Regardless.
I mean, just look at the 80s run here, all the way through to 1990. 1980 was The Empire Strikes Back, arguably the best Star Wars movie. 81 was Raiders of the Lost Ark. 82, Blade Runner. 83, Return of the Jedi. Then Temple of Doom. 85, Witness. 86, The Mosquito Coast. 88, Frantic. Also in 88, Working Girl. Then 89, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Then Presumed Innocent in 1990. Is that one of the greatest movie star decade runs of all time?
That's.
I think it might actually be. It might actually be.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and look, and even through the 90s, even though the films get different, you know, you have the Jack Ryan films, you have The Fugitive, you know, you get Air Force One in 97. Like, I don't think it was the late 90s might have been a little bit of a tail off.
I only singled out the 80s because that gives like a conclusive decade to bookmark it in.
Sure.
But you're not wrong. Carrying it in through to the mid to late 90s, that trend doesn't really end. Like that still goes on for quite a while.
You could argue that run goes from 1980 to 1994.
Yeah.
That's a 14-year run of just hit after hit after just
Yeah.
I mean, that's a long time to just be like, I'm hitting home runs all the time. Like
to think a man like this who started off as a carpenter who then became the biggest movie star of his time.
Yeah. And I think maybe that's where just my disappointment for the 2000s kind of rings, because like that was such a great 14, 15-year run there. You know, and you're starting at 1980. There's also Star Wars in 97, The Conversation in 74, as you talked about, you know, and of course he had little roles in some other movies as well. And then you just get to the 2000s and it just is like, okay.
Yeah.
Not the best. Not the best run after that.
Not quite. Yeah. I mean,
but maybe
no one's
he didn't care at that point. I as far as
point, he made his billions at that point.
He made it. Yeah, exactly. So he just wanted to do whatever he wanted to do. And that's fine.
He's the man that's been trying to crystallize all of his classic characters' arcs for so long because he just doesn't want to play them anymore. I remember someone at Comic-Con asked him, "Are you just going to keep revitalizing your classic characters until you don't do them anymore?" And he said, "You're goddamn right."
You might as well.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and that's the thing. Like, I will die on the hill for The Force Awakens. That was an Oscar caliber performance.
He's great in it.
Blade Runner 2049. He's equally just as good there. And say what you will about Dial of Destiny, but I think he puts a lot of care and like he loved doing that movie. And he's talked about that recently. Like, hey, look, you win some, you lose some. But he put everything into that role. And I think that is, again, regardless of what you feel about the film, you see the tender the tender care he puts into that performance. Like, he put everything into it.
I will say this, like, I am not the biggest Dial of Destiny fan. There are some days I think I slightly prefer Kingdom of the Crystal Skull just for being as weird as it is. But I think Harrison Ford absolutely gives the better performance in Dial of Destiny. It's no question for me.
Yeah. And I think the reason I like that film, and especially that performance, is it's a little bit of that Force Awakens thing where he's deconstructing the character a little bit. He's
channeling that a little
saying
bit.
Goodbye.
Yeah, I could see that.
And maybe I guess a little bit of 2049 as well. Like his whole thing in recent years is, let's deconstruct these characters a little bit and we'll say goodbye to them. That's kind of what he wants.
He wants to move on, but hopefully we get more shrinkings as he's moving on, and maybe not as much Red Hulks. I haven't even seen Captain America 4 yet, so I can't judge. He's probably really good in it, for my opinion. But maybe we get more of the other side.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about Cap later this week, but and I know this has surprisingly been a little divisive, at least with the people I've talked to. I don't know if this is across the board, but of those that I have talked to, not everyone has loved Ford in that film. I thought he was good. There are elements of it where it very much plays to his strengths. I think if anything where the performance might falter a little bit is he's asked to do MCU things, of course.
So it's more so the movie failing his abilities than him failing the movie.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's
why am I not surprised to hear that?
Exactly. But I think as far as him being Harrison Ford in an MCU movie, like, I think he full on goes for it. And when it works to when it tailors to him, I think he's more than, good. I think he's perfectly.
Well, as we said, he's most likely incapable of phoning it in. So I wouldn't be surprised if he at least tries.
Yeah. That's how I feel. We'll talk about it later in the week, though.
Yeah.
I guess we'll go ahead and use that as a transition as we are at the end of the show here.
Absolutely.
We will be talking about Captain America, Brave New World later on this week, so you can be on the lookout for that. We will also take a trip to Peru to visit Paddington.
You will.
So we will have that coming this week as well. We will have a new Chasing the Gold where Shadon and company will talk about the BAFTAs. And there will be a new Women in Session at the end of the week as well. I do want to highlight, if you want to go and check out last week's reviews, we talked about Love Hurts and Hard Eyes. Valentine's is over, but I'm sure both of those movies will be streaming this week somewhere.
I know, seriously.
That's how it works now.
That's how it works. Even though, from what I understand, Hard Eyes seem to be doing okay, given its budget. So that was at least cool to see for a movie like that.
Yeah, I think it was doing okay at the box office. So people are going and seeing that movie. I really enjoyed it.
You could do a lot worse.
You could do a lot worse. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree. So you can go and check out those reviews from last week. Do look forward to getting into Cap in Paddington this week. With that, as always, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. If you're watching us here on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button, like the video, comment, all that fun stuff. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please reach out to us on social media. And on Spotify, you can leave comments on Spotify now. I
absolutely.
Don't mention that enough, but we read those, so we would love to hear your comments there. You can always email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. As always, stay tuned to the website, InSessionFilm.com. We have a lot of great content each and every week from our illustrious staff. We really do love the work they are putting out there. I want to highlight Jaylon Salah here for a moment because she put out a really thoughtful and heartful and personal piece on motherhood and how that is implemented in horror films specifically.
Oh,
and it's really good. Really, I mean, she's always fantastic, but that piece is especially poignant. So I do urge people to go and check that out. And all the great content we have there. InSessionFilm.com. Brendan, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Well, to quote the great Chance the Rapper, go get that hockey.
Go get that hockey. Absolutely. Let's do that hockey.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can beat that. Yes. Let's do that hockey.
I was doing your final thoughts for you as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. With that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast. I do love Harrison. He's the best.
Get off my plate.